Steps went up the headland at Vardhaug, and Ingirid Amundsdottir went up all of them in the dark with a bundle of split fur under one arm and the wind trying to take her off the stone. Because she had seen a thing out on the water that had no business being there. She counted as she climbed. She had counted those steps since she was 6 winters old. First as a game and then as a way of not thinking about the drop on the seaward side. And by now, the counting happened whether she wanted it or not. The way breathing happens. 90, 91, 92. The wind came up the face of the headland in slabs, a northeaster with sleet in it, and twice it put her down on her hands and she got up with the fur still under her arm, because the fur was dry and there was no other dry wood on that hill. At 200 she was above the byre roof and the whole Ravnsund opened out below her in the black, 40 miles of water lying between white mountains, and there was nothing on it. Ships did not run the Ravnsund at night in the storm month. No skipper alive would put a keel inside the horses in a northeaster in the dark, because the horses were 3 acres of broken water off the point of Vardhaug where the sea stood up on stone in any weather at all, and the only clear road past them was the gate, and the gate was 200 yards wide. At 300, the wind changed its note, and she stopped, because the note it changed to was the note it made coming off canvas. She had lived on that headland her whole life. She knew what the wind sounded like in the wood stack, in the gap between the cairn stones, in the heather, in her own hood. She did not know it in canvas, because canvas had not been on that water at that hour in her lifetime. But she knew it was not any of the other things, and while she stood there with her mouth open the sleet cleared for the length of 3 breaths, and she saw the horses breaking white. That was ordinary. The horses always broke white. What was not ordinary was the second patch of white, a long way inside the first, in the middle of the gate where the water was 12 fathoms deep and had never broken in the memory of anybody living. And between the 2 whites, low and dark and much too close, something square went across the sleet and was gone. She did the remaining 111 steps in a time she could not afterwards account for. The cairn at Vardhaug stood on the highest ground of the point, a cone of split fir and old fence timber built up inside a ring of lifted stone as tall as a man, with a tarred hide lashed over the top of it, and a channel of dry heather laid down one side to the windhole at the base. Her father had rebuilt it the year before he died, and he had built it the way his father built it, so that a woman with cold hands could get a fire into the heart of it in the dark without seeing what she was doing. She got the hide off. She got the heather packed. She took the fire iron out of the box at her belt. The flat steel with the worn grip and the flint and the tin of charred linen, her father's and her grandfather's before him. And she struck it 11 times before she got a spark to sit, because her hands had gone past cold into stupid. Then the linen took, and the heather went, and the fur went, and the fire came up out of the windhole and stood 20 feet in the air. By the light of it she could see the whole point, and the wet stone and her own breath, and nothing at all out on the water. Because a big fire at night makes you blind to everything past it. That is the first thing every firekeeper learns and the last thing any of them believes. She stood with her back against the stone ring and her arms round herself, and she waited for Selhaug. Selhaug was the next cairn up the Ravnsund, 4 miles north on a low green shoulder above a shingle bay. And from the Vardhaug point you could see the exact place where its fire would show, a notch between 2 hills that everyone on that water called the doorway. If Vardhaug lit, Selhaug lit, then Kolnis, then Bruthaug, then Orns, then Crossvik, then Eternis, and away up the Sund from headland to headland, 43 cairns in all from the seat at Hafsburg to the freshwater at the head. And the word went 90 miles in under 2 hours in weather no rider could cross in a day. That was the chain. It had been the chain since before anybody could say when. Her father had told her the whole of it before she could plait her own hair, and she had said it back to him standing on a stool with her hand on the stone. The fire is not yours, it is the coast's, and you keep it whether you are believed or not. She watched the doorway all night. Nothing came up in it. Not at midnight, not at the turn. Not at the gray hour when the sleet stopped and the wind came round into the north and the whole Ravnsund lay flat and hard and empty from Vardhaug to the mountains. Selhaug's shoulder stood there in the first light, with no more fire on it than a plate. She fed her own cairn until the fur was gone, and then she fed it fenced timber, and then she fed it the 2 rails of the sheep pen, and it burned into the morning, and the smoke went up and leaned north, and everybody on the Ravnsund who had eyes saw it, which was the entire point of a fire, and became, within about a day and a half, the entire problem. Nothing came ashore. That was the second thing, and it was worse than the first. Anund went down to the strand at low water, which took him most of the morning because his left leg had been broken twice and set once, and he walked 2 miles of shingle under the horses and found kelp, and a dogfish, and 1 plank so old it had barnacles on both faces. The Hjaltvik boats went out on the flood, 6 of them, because 6 skippers still had enough of their fathers in them to go and look, and they worked the eddy inside the horses where anything lost off the gate would have come, and they found the water empty and the bottom clean, and came in at dusk cold and wet and out of temper. And Bard Salvason stood on the quay in a good coat and said, loudly, so that it carried the length of the boat sheds, well, by the 3rd day it was settled in the district the way a frost settles, quietly and everywhere at once. There had been no ship, no wreck, no plank, no spar, no oar, no sailcloth, nothing on 4 miles of shore and nothing on the bottom, and a woman alone on a headland in a northeaster at 2 a.m. with a fire in her hands. Halla Solvadottir put the kindest version about, which was that Ingirid had seen the moon on the water, and the moon on the water in a gale will fool anybody. The less kind version took about a week longer and came, as such things do, from nobody in particular. It was that a woman of 24 winters, with no husband, no brother, no wolf that anyone had heard in 2 years, and 411 steps between her and the nearest living voice might light a fire on a headland for the pleasure of having 40 men come looking for her. Ingirid heard that one in the meal shed at Hjaltvik with a basket on her hip, and she stood there while the 2 women who were saying it worked out that she was behind them. And then she bought her meal and paid the right money and walked out, and she did not go back to Hjaltvik for 11 days. The charge was laid at the house thing before the month was out. The law of the fires on that coast was old and short, and everybody knew it, which is a dangerous combination. A keeper who did not light when there was cause paid with the keep of the fire and with whatever the district decided the cause had been worth. The other end of it was the one nobody thought about until they needed it. A keeper who lit when there was no cause paid 12 marks of silver to the district and lost the keep of the fire to another house. And the cairn was thrown down and built again by another hand on another headland. And the reason for that was not spite. A chain of fires only works while every man on the coast believes it. A fire that means nothing teaches a coast to sleep. The old men who cut that law knew it, and they wrote the price high on purpose. 12 marks of silver. Ingirid Amundsdottir owned 9 sheep, a boat with a sprung strake, a byre, a house of 1 room and a loft, 411 steps, and a headland. Ozur Thorbergsson had been lawman of the Ravnsund for 31 years, and he did not enjoy any part of it. He stood up in the longhouse at Hjaltvik with 60 people packed in out of the wind, and he read the charge in the flat voice he used for everything. And then he asked her, because the law made him ask whether she had cause. There was a ship, she said. Where? In the gate. Inside the horses, coming north. Seen by me. Seen by any other. No. Found by any other. No. Anything of her found on the shore or in the water or reported into any harbor on this coast?" "No," said Ingirid. Ozer wrote, "The room made the small, comfortable noise a room makes when it has been told what it already decided. And Bard Solvason of Kolness stood up at the front with his thumbs in his belt and said, reasonably, that nobody in the district thought Amundsdottir a liar exactly, and that a hill in the dark in a gale would show a person all sorts of things, and that the honest question in front of them was not what she had seen, but whether the keep of the fire should sit on a headland where there was one pair of hands, one pair of eyes, and no man at all, when it could sit at Kolness, where there were 9 grown men in the house and wood cut 2 years ahead. He did not mention that the keep of the fire carried the drift right of 4 miles of shore, or 1 barrel in 20 out of every boat that wintered at Yaltvik, because everybody in the room could do that arithmetic without help. Ozer set the doom day for the second thing after the Frostmoon and told her she might bring proof. She walked home up the shore road with the light going and the tide out, and the horses standing white off the point the way they had stood white since the world was made. And she did the 411 steps in the dark without counting, which had never once happened before. Vardhaug in the winter half of the year held 3 living things, and one of them was a bad-tempered ewe. The house was 1 room with a loft, a hearth of beech stone, a plank door that faced away from the sea because whoever built it had been sensible, and a smoke hole that worked when the wind was in the west. Anund had come to that house with her father when they were both young men off the same boat, and he had never left it. And now he was 71 and could not get up the headland at all. So he did the wood splitting at the bottom of the steps and she did the carrying, and between them they put 40 loads a year into the stack under the tarred hide, and that was the whole business of their lives. He did not ask her about the ship. He had asked her once, on the first morning, and she had told him, and he had said right, and gone to look at the strand. And that had been the end of the asking as far as he was concerned, which was worth more to her that winter than she could have said out loud. What he did say, that night, with the fire down and the door barred, was this: "Your father would have lit it. My father would have been believed." "No," said Anund, "he wouldn't. But he'd have lit it." Her wolf had been quiet since her father died. That was the other thing the district knew about her, and the thing that made the rest of it stick. She had come of age like any Omega on that coast, and there had been a season when the wolf in her was so close under the skin that she could feel it turn over when the moon came up out of the mountains. And then Amund Ravnsund went out in a flat calm in the 5th month to lift a net and did not come back, and something in her closed like a hand. She had not felt it since. She did not talk about it. On a coast where a woman's standing is measured in things she can be seen to have, being a keeper whose wolf had gone silent was one more empty shelf, and Halla Solvadottir had once said, in company, that it was a wonder the fire on Vardhaug ever caught at all, given what was keeping it. 12 days before the Frostmoon, a man came up the 411 steps who did not belong to the Ravnsund. She saw him from the cairn when he was still at 150, and she watched him the whole way, because there was nothing else to do and because he was climbing wrong. Everybody who lived on that water climbed the Vardhaug steps in the same 3 pushes with 2 rests, and this man went up them at one flat pace like a man walking on a road, with a rolled gray coat on his back, and a wax tablet under the flap of it, and a lantern horn on a thong at his belt. Iron-capped, swinging, there was a gray wolf with him. It came up the steps beside his knee without hurrying, and it did not look at her once, which is not how wolves behave on a strange headland. And it stopped where the heather ended and the swept stone began and sat down there, and did not come further. He was a big man, past 35, brown-bearded, with warrior braids grown out untidy, and a nose that had been broken and healed crooked, and he wore a plain undyed wool coat with no rings on him anywhere, and a leather cap and boots that had been mended by somebody good. He stood at the edge of her swept ground and looked, for a while at the cairn, and at the wood stack, and at the hide, and at the way the heather channel was laid, and then at her. "You keep this," he said. "I do." "Sent from the seat," he said. "To go up the water and put a hand on every cairn between Hafsburg and the head, and write down what is there. There will be paper on it, and it will be read. I would rather you knew that at the start than found it out later. You'll be here for the doom then," I heard there was one. "You'll have heard the rest of it too. I've heard 4 versions between Hafsburg and your steps," he said, "and they can't all be true, so I've stopped carrying any of them." He put his hand out, flat, the way men did on that coast, and said, "Steinar and Ingirid Amundsdottir," who was the last firekeeper of the Ravnsund and did not know it yet, took the hand of the Alpha King of Hafsburg on her own doorstep, and told him he could sleep in the byre. He was up before her on the first morning, which had not happened to Ingirid in her adult life. She came out with the milk pail at the grey hour, and there was a man standing at the cairn, looking at the way the heather channel ran down to the windhole, and he had already split and stacked what was left of the fence timber, and the wolf was lying along the base of the stone ring, with its chin on its paws like a dog in a hall. "Your channel's laid backwards to the ones at Hafsburg," he said, without turning round. "It's laid for a northeaster." "That's what I mean," he said, and wrote something. He worked the way a man works who has been told to bring back a number. He measured the cairn, the height of the ring, the width of the base, the depth of the heart, the length of the windhole. He counted the wood stack by armfuls and made her show him what an armful was. He asked how many nights a winter the fire had to be watched, and she said all of them, from the Frostmoon to the thaw, and he stopped writing and looked at her. "All of them. That's the law of the keep. I know what the law of the keep says," he said. "I asked how many you watch." "All of them," said Ingirid. He wrote that down too, and did not say anything else about it for 5 weeks. On the second day he began on the night itself, and he did it in a way she had not been done by before. Ozer had asked her 5 questions and stopped. Bard had asked her none at all, because Bard had never wanted an answer. This man asked her what the wind was doing when she came out of the door, and what it was doing at 200 steps, and whether it was steady or in slabs, and how much sleet, and whether the sleet was falling or lifting off the sea. He asked whether the sound she had heard had been ahead of the white or behind it. He asked how long the clear had lasted, and she said 3 breaths, and he made her stand there and breathe 3 breaths so he could count them. "And the shape?" he said. "Say it the smallest way you can say it. Not what it was, what it looked like." "Square," said Ingirid. "Low, dark against the white. Going across, right to left, and gone. Left being north. Left being north." He looked at the water for a while. Then he said, "What proof have you?" And she laughed, which surprised them both, because she had not made that noise since the storm month. "None," she said. "That's what nobody up here will hear. There isn't any. If I'd been wrong, there'd be nothing on the shore. And if I'd been right and they came through, there'd be nothing on the shore either. Because a ship that gets through doesn't leave anything behind. The only thing a fire ever proves is that nothing happened. That's what it's for. You can't put that in front of a thing, because it looks exactly the same as doing nothing at all." He did not answer her. He turned the tablet over on his knee and wrote for longer than that deserved, and when she looked down at it, she could not read it, because she could not read, and he did not offer to tell her. On the 4th day they took the boat out. The strake was sprung and they bailed, and Anand sat in the stern working the sheet with his bad leg braced against the thwart, happier than he had been all winter, and they went out on the young flood inside the horses to where the second white had been. Steinar had a lead line with knots in it and a lump of tallow in the hollow of the lead, and he sounded the gate from the Vardhaug side across to the broken water, and after the 9th cast his face changed. "Say the old marks," he said. 12 fathoms in the middle, 9 at the north end. Never less than 7 anywhere in it, from the horses to the shore stones. He hauled the line up hand over hand and held the knot out to her without a word. It was a little over 2 fathoms. They worked it all afternoon. The gate was still there. What had happened to it was that something had been walking, the way sand and shingle walk in a coast's bad years, and a bank had come up along the seaward side of the channel out of the tail of the horses, hard on top. 2 fathoms at low water and less in the trough of a sea, and it had taken the gate from 200 yards wide, down to something Steinar measured 3 times and called 70. The old marks were 60 years old, and nobody had sounded the gate in that time, because nobody needed to. 200 yards is a road. 70 yards in the dark in a northeaster is not a road. It is a keyhole. That's proof, said Onund from the stern. It's proof there's a bank, said Ingirid. It isn't proof there was a ship. Bard will stand up and say so, and he'll be right. Steinar coiled the line. He'll be right, he agreed. He was right about that, and it went exactly that way. Ozer wrote the soundings into the district book and had them read out at the meal shed so the boats would know, and 3 skippers came up to Ingirid afterwards and said, "In the mumbling way men on that coast say such things, that it was a good job somebody had gone and looked." And then Halasolvadottir said, at the well, where 6 people could hear her, that it was a great comfort to know there was a bank in the gate, and a greater comfort still to know the king's own man was sleeping in Vardhaug byre, and that some women got their looking done for them, and some had to do it themselves. Ingirid put her bucket down and stood in front of her. "Say the rest of it," she said. Hala was a handsome woman of about 40 with a fine wool cloak and a way of holding her chin that had been useful to her for 25 years, and she smiled and said there was no rest of it. "There is," said Ingirid. "You've been saying it since the storm month, and you've never once said it to me, so say it now, in the open, and I'll answer it in the open. Say I lit the fire to bring men up my hill. Nobody at that well said anything at all. It went on a good while." "You're very loud," said Hala at last, "for a woman with nothing," and she took her bucket and went. And that was counted a victory by everybody who was there, because that is how such things are counted. Ingirid carried her water up 411 steps and did not spill any of it, which took some doing. They started up the coast in the 2nd week. He wanted every cairn between Hafsburg and the head of the sun put a hand on, and Hafsburg lay 30 miles south of Vardhaug, and the head of the water lay 60 miles north, and he had come up the southern half already. So they went north together, because he needed a person who knew where the paths left the shore road, and Onund could not walk it. And because Ingirid had one question of her own that she had been carrying since the storm month like a stone in a shoe. And it was not a question about her own fire. It was, why did Selhog not answer? Selhog was 4 miles. They did it in the morning over the shoulder with the wolf ranging ahead, and they came up onto the low green ground above the shingle bay where the fire would show in the doorway. And Ingirid stopped 30 paces short of the cairn and did not go any nearer. The ring of stone was there. Inside it there was a hollow full of black rotted timber with grass growing out of the top of it. And the hide was gone, and the windhole had a lamb's skull in it, and the wood stack against the north side of the ring was 4 lengths of fence rails so soft you could put your thumb through them. She stood there for a long time. "When were you last on this hill?" said Steinar. 3 years ago. Maybe 4. There's no reason to come to Selhog. She looked at the timber and at the grass, and she was working something out and not liking it. Grass doesn't grow in a cairn in one winter. "No," he said, "it doesn't." Kolnes was the next, 7 miles, and Kolnes had a cairn because Bard Solvason had wanted the keep of the fire for 6 years, and had built a good one to argue with, and it stood on his headland with wood cut 2 years ahead exactly as he had said in the longhouse, and it had never been lit in its life. Bruthaug had no cairn. There was a sheepfold on Bruthaug Head, a good tight one. And the stones in the wall of it were the flat lifted stones of a fire ring. And everybody in that house knew it, and nobody was ashamed, because the fold had been there 11 years, and the man who built it was in the ground. At Orns the ring was sound, and the wood was sound, and the hide was on. And then the woman of the house said, pleasantly, that they had the old iron somewhere, and she would look for it if it was wanted, and went in, and came out a long while later, and had not found it. It had gone south with a peddler in the spring for a griddle and 2 knives. Crossvik, Yternus, Steinvik, Hamarsness, 6 more after that, going north, with the light getting shorter, and one of them had a hide, and none of them had dry wood, and 2 of them had nothing left on the headland at all, but a ring of stone with the heather grown over it like a healed scar. On the 9th day, coming back down the shore road into Hjaltvik in the dark, with her legs shaking under her, Ingirid said, "You knew." "I suspected." "How? Because I walked the southern half before I came to you," said Steinar, "and it is the same. And I have been asking myself since Hafsburg what kind of coast lets 43 fires go out at once. And coasts do not do things at once. Somebody does them." Ozer Thorbergsson kept the district book in a chest under the bench in the long house at Hjaltvik, and he did not want to open it, and he opened it. Because a man sent from the seat had asked for the keeper roll, and there is no version of the law of the Ravnsund in which a lawman refuses that. He turned the leaves with 2 fingers, the way old men turn leaves. The keeper roll was on the left. Steinar took it and began to copy it, and Ingirid stood at his shoulder looking at the marks she could not read. And Ozer stood at the other side of the board with his hands behind him and his eyes on the wall. And something about the way he was standing made her look down at the right hand leaf instead. It was a long entry with a great many marks under it. She could not read it. But she could count, and she counted the marks, and there were 41. "What's that one?" she said. Ozer did not answer. "Lawman, what's that one?" "That," said Steinar, who had stopped writing, "is a petition to the seat out of this district, entered 2 winters ago in the summer half of the year, asking that the Ravnsund be released from the keeping of the winter watch for a term of 3 years. The wood, the men, and the nights from the Frostmoon to the thaw." He put his finger under a line and moved it along without looking up. "It says the wood cannot be spared out of a bad forest year. It says the young men are wanted on the boats. It says the coast has been quiet in the winter half for 30 years, and no fire has been raised on this water in the lifetime of most of the men signing." He stopped. It was granted. The seat's answer is written under it in another hand. The long house was very cold, and there were 3 hens in it. 41, said Ingirid. 41, there are 43 houses that hold cairns on this water. "Yes," said Steinar. "Read them." "I can't read them to you. They're marks, not names." "There's a list of the houses down the side in the lawman's hand." He looked at it. Vardhaug is not on it. Ytterns is not on it. Old Thorolf of Ytterns had been in the ground since the winter after that summer. Everybody knew that. Ingirid had carried a cheese to his burying. She stood in the long house at Hjaltvik with her wet cloak steaming, and she understood all at once the shape of the thing she had been living inside for 2 years without seeing one edge of it. The winter watch on the Ravnsund had ended in the summer before her father died. The whole coast had asked to be let off it, and had been let off it, lawfully. In the open, with 41 marks in a book that lay under a bench 40 paces from where she bought her meal, and nobody had told her. Not Ozer, who wrote it, not Bard, who signed it, not Halla, who laughed at her at the well, not one of the 6 skippers who told her it was a good job somebody had gone and looked. For 2 years she had gone up 411 steps in the dark 3 nights a week, from the Frostmoon to the thaw, and split 40 loads a year, and tarred the hide, and struck the iron on the black nights to be sure the linen was dry, and the coast had let her do it, and had liked knowing there was one fire on the water and had said nothing, because the moment anybody said anything, somebody would have had to say it out loud. We gave it up, and she didn't. And on the night she lit, there was not one living soul on any headland from Hafsburg to the head of the Sund. There was nobody at Selhaug to see her fire. There was nobody at Kolnes, nobody at Orns, nobody at Krossvik. There was a coast of cold stones. And a woman standing on a point in a northeaster with 20 feet of fire over her head, waiting all night for an answer from 42 empty hills. "You let me stand there," she said. Ozer said, "The relief does not touch the law of the keep. You held the keep. You were obliged to light on cause, and you are answerable for lighting without it. Nothing in that book helps you." "I'm not asking whether it helps me," said Ingirid. "I'm asking why not one of you told me the watch was over." Ozer Thorbergsson had been lawman for 31 years, and he had said harder things than this to better people, and he looked at the hens. "Because you'd have stopped," he said. She walked the shore road home in the dark, and she did not go inside when she got there. She stood at the bottom of the steps for a while, and then she went up, all 411 of them, counting. And she pulled the hide back and laid the heather channel fresh for a northeaster, and sat down against the stone ring with her arms round her knees, in the wind, for 2 hours, on a night when there was nobody within 40 miles who would have answered her. The wolf came up at some point and lay down on the swept stone about 3 feet away, which it had not done before, and did not look at her, which she was grateful for. She asked Ozer 2 days later whether the petition could be read at her doom. "It can be read. It will not weigh," he said. The relief let the coast off the watching. It did not let you off the keeping. A false fire is a false fire whether there is 1 cairn on this water or 43. "I'm not asking it to weigh for me," said Ingirid. "I want it read out. I want every man who put a mark in that book to stand in front of it while it's read." Ozer Thorbergsson looked at her for a while with his hands behind his back. "That," he said, "is spite." "Yes," said Ingirid. "Read it anyway." She was, for about 4 days, a genuinely unpleasant person to be near. Then something turned over in her, and instead of going down to Hjaltvik to be looked at, she went north to Selhaug with an axe. There was standing timber in the gully behind that hill, spruce killed by salt in some old gale. And she went up on the first white morning after the book, and worked until the light went, and came home with her hands opened up, and did it again the next day. And by the 4th day the rotted heart of the Selhaug cairn was out on the grass in a heap, and there was 1 course of fresh split spruce laid, dry in the bottom of the ring. Steinar did not ask her what she was doing until the 3rd day, and when he did she said, "There's a cairn on that hill and there's no wood in it," and put her head down and went on. He came with her after that. He was better with an axe than she was, and he had a way of taking the heavy end of everything without ever appearing to have decided to. And between them they put 11 loads into Selhaug in 8 days. Nobody from Hjaltvik came to help, except that a young man off the shore road named Vestin turned up on his own with a sledge, said nothing about it, pulled 6 loads up the shoulder, and stopped coming when his father found out. "You'll not finish 43 of them," said Steinar on the 8th evening, in the dark, on the shore road, with the axe over his shoulder. "No, then why?" "Because there's a cairn on that hill and there's no wood in it," said Ingirid. "And because when they take my keep off me in 11 days and give it to Bard Solvason, whoever holds it has exactly the same coast to hold, and none of that is Selhaug's fault." She walked a while. "Put it in your paper. Not about me. Put in that the fires are out from Hafsburg to the head, and it isn't wickedness. It's wood." They asked to be let off because a bad forest year and a good excuse came along together, and 2 years went past, and now there's nothing on those hills to light even if a man wanted to. Ask the seat for wood. Ask for iron. There's no house on this water would say no to a cord of dry fir on its own headland if somebody handed it up. He walked about 100 paces before he answered. "I'll put it in the paper," he said, in a voice she had not heard him use. The horn hung at his belt every hour of the day, and it was, she decided, the single most ridiculous thing about him. It was a cow horn, capped in iron at both ends, the big cap on a hinge, and inside it there was a bed of ash and 3 embers, and twice a day he opened it and turned them, and fed them slivers of touchwood off a block he kept in his coat, and never in 5 weeks did he let it go out. He lit their hearth from it every morning. He would not use her fire iron. When they slept out on the north road, he built the fire from the horn in the wet, with a hand round it, like a man shielding a bird. "You keep that thing," she said, watching him do it on the Crossvic road, the way an old woman keeps a cat. "It's less trouble than a cat. You've a steel in your pack. I've seen it." What sort of man walks 90 miles of winter coast making a study of fire and won't strike his own? "A careful one," said Steinar, and shut the cap. She thought about a good many things that winter more often than they deserved. She thought about the fact that in 5 weeks he had never once asked her whether she was sure about the ship, and that everybody else she had ever met had asked her that inside 4 sentences. She thought about how the gray wolf, which had walked up her steps on the first day at his knee, now lay at the base of her cairn from the time she started work until the time she came down, and had twice put its head under her hand, and how she had seen him look at that and look away. And once, on a hard, clear night at the end of the 5th week, coming down the last 60 steps, with the Frostmoon coming up out of the mountains behind her, and him below her on the stair with a load on his shoulder, something turned over under her ribs. She stopped. So suddenly, he walked into her. It was not a large thing. It was the size of a mouse. It was the first movement of any kind she had felt in that place in 2 years, since a flat calm in the 5th month, and she stood on the 60th step with her hand on the rock and her heart going like a bird's, and then it was gone. "What?" he said. "Nothing," Cramp Onund told the story of the seat's fire on the night of the frost moon. Because Onund told that story every year on the night of the frost moon, and had done since before Ingirid could walk, and he was not going to stop for a stranger in the house. "Hafsburg's is the last one," he said, with his bad leg out along the bench and a horn cup in his fist. 43 cairns from the head of the water to the seat, and 42 of them talk to each other, and Hafsburg's talks to nobody. Hafsburg's answers nothing. You can burn every hill on this coast down to the stone, and the seat will sit there black. Because the seat's fire is not a message, it's a judgment. It goes up when the king has seen the cause with his own 2 eyes and not before. 3 times in my life. Once in the ice year, and once when I was 40. And that time I was on the water off Erns, and saw it come up over the shoulder of Hafsburg like the sun in the wrong place. And I will tell you what a man does when he sees that. He puts in. Every keel on this coast puts in, and every hill answers it inside the hour, whether the man on that hill knows the cause or not, because the seat has seen it, and that is the end of the argument. And it can't be struck by anybody else, said Ingirid, who had heard this 20 times. It can't be got at by anybody else. That's the beauty of it. Onund drank. The seat's fire is not struck, it's carried. It's fed off the seat's own hearth and it's kept, and a fire lit off it is the seat's fire wherever in the world it's lit, on a hill or in a ditch. And there's not a lawman on this coast could say otherwise. And there's the other half of it that nobody remembers, because nobody's had cause to use it since the ice year. A cairn burning under the seat's fire may not be thrown down. It may not be touched, or moved, or judged, or taken off the house that holds it. It has to be crowned, fed till the seat's fire is out. And if that takes all night, then every man standing on that hill carries wood all night, and I'd give my other leg to see it. Ingirid laughed at him. She looked across the hearth while she was laughing, and Steinar of Hafsburg was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall mending the strap of her father's fire iron box with a bone needle, and he did not look up. and he did not say one word. The midwinter feast at Hjaltvik was held in the longhouse 6 days before the doom. She was not going to go. Anund said if she did not go, it would be said she was ashamed, and if she went, it would be said she was brazen, and since both were going to be said, she might as well eat a hot dinner while they said it. So she went, in her mother's good gown with the braid at the neck, and she was not seated. There was no cruelty in it that anybody could have been made to answer for. Bard's people took the top of the board and the skippers took the middle. And by the time Ingirid came in, there was no room made anywhere along it. And Halla Solvadottir said, pleasantly, that they had not been sure she would come, and moved her cloak off the bench beside her about half a second too late for it to mean anything but what it meant. So she ate at the cold end, on a stool by the door, where the draught came under and the fire did not reach, and after a while a big brown-bearded man in a plain coat, who had been offered a place at the middle board, came and got his bowl, and came down and sat on the floor beside her stool, with his back against the doorpost, in front of everybody, and ate his dinner there. Nobody said anything. It was noticed the length of the room. "You've made that worse," she said. "Probably you'll be gone in a month and I'll still be here." "Yes," said Steinar, and looked into his bowl, and she saw his jaw set. "That's the whole of the trouble." There was a moment then. She was aware of it, and so was he, in the smoke and the noise of 80 people on a stool and a floor in a draught. And she watched him take a breath, and turn and open his mouth to say something that was going to be enormous, and then stop, and let the breath out through his nose, and say instead, "Your gown's good." "That's a poor effort." "It is," he agreed. The next morning, Bard Solvason went to the lawman with 9 householders behind him, and asked that the doom be brought forward to the first thing after the Frostmoon instead of the second, on the grounds that the woman was 12 days from being unable to feed 9 sheep, that the coast could not sit with the keep of a fire in dispute through the worst month of the year, and that no paper written by any warden could bind a district in the matter of its own cairn. He was right on the last point, and Ozer told him so. The doom was moved forward by 9 days. It was moved on a morning when Steinar was 30 miles south, at Hafsburgside, walking the last 4 cairns of his roll, because he had gone down 2 days before with the wolf and a bundle of paper. And he had told her he would be back on the second thing, which was now the wrong thing. She sent no word after him. There was no word to send that would have arrived. She had 3 days. She spent the first of them going round the houses of Hjaltvik asking men to speak for her at the doom, and getting out of 11 houses, 11 versions of the same kind, sad, immovable no. She spent the second one carrying wood up 411 steps, because if they were going to break the cairn, she was not going to let them break an empty one. She spent the third one on the headland doing nothing at all. He came up the steps at dusk on the third day with sleet on his shoulders, having walked 30 miles in a day and a half. And she was so glad to see him that she had to stand with her back to him for a moment, and then she turned round and told him to go. "They've moved it," she said. "I know. I met Vestine on the shore road. He came 6 miles out to tell me. He put the bundle down. That's why I'm here." "Then you've wasted 30 miles, because there's nothing for you to do here, and I want you off this hill before morning." She was standing between him and the cairn with her arms folded and her chin up, and she had worked out exactly what she was going to say on the way up. And she said it. "You've a role to finish and a paper to write, and it's the only good thing that's going to come out of any of this. If you're stood on my headland tomorrow when they throw the cairn down, you're the king's man watching the king's man's friend get done, and Bard will write to Hafsburg inside the week and say the survey was bought, and every word you've written about wood and iron and 43 cold hills goes in the fire with my roof. So go south. Go tonight. Write your paper. And you?" "I'll stand there," said Ingirid. "I've stood there before. The moon came up over the mountains behind Vardhaug while they were arguing about it, which took some of the wind out of both of them, and they ended up sitting on the cold stone of the ring with a foot of air between them, looking down 400 feet at the Ravnsund lying like beaten iron. "My mother used to say a thing about the fire," she said, after a while. "I've never told anybody, because it's the sort of thing that gets a woman laughed at, and I've had my allowance of that." She turned the fire iron box over in her hands. She said a beacon is a moon you can make with your hands. That's all it is. You can't be the moon and you can't be anybody's luck. You just put a light up where the dark is, and then you stand next to it, and whether it does any good is not your business, and you will most likely never find out. Steinar Håkansson looked at the water for a long moment. "You'll find out," he said. "That's a stupid thing to say to somebody." "Yes," he said. "I'm not able to say the other thing." She went to sleep that night on the loft floor listening to a man moving about in the byre below her. And she woke before light on the morning of the doom and put on her mother's gown and made porridge that nobody ate and took her father's fire iron out of its box and put it back in and went out into a hard blue morning with 4 inches of new snow on the swept stone. The byre was empty. The horn was gone off the peg. So was the wolf. She stood in the yard for a while with the box in both hands. Then she went up the 411 steps for what she believed was the last time, counting every one of them out loud, the way she had at 6 winters old, because counting was the only thing she had left that nobody in that district could argue with. They came up in 1s and 2s all morning, and by midday there were 64 people on the point of Vardhaug, which was more than had stood on that ground at one time since her father's burying. A doom is a public act, and the law of the Ravnsund says it is done in the place it concerns, and it was a hard blue day with no wind, and the walking was good, and most of them came because they wanted to see it. Ingirid stood with her back to the stone ring in her mother's gown with the fire iron box in both hands, and watched them come over the lip of the steps, blowing and stamping the snow off, and settle into a rough ring on the swept stone with the cairn and the woman in the middle of it. Bard Solvason brought 4 men with iron bars and set them down against the ring in plain view, which was not required by any law, and was not strictly an insult, and everybody understood it. Ozer Thorbergsson read the charge off the roll in the flat voice, and asked her, because the law made him ask, whether she had proof. "No," said Ingirid Amundsdottir. "I have a bank in the gate that wasn't in the old marks, and a coast with 42 cold cairns on it, and none of that is proof. I saw a ship inside the horses in a northeaster, and I lit the fire, and I'd light it again tonight, and there is nothing on this earth I can put in your hand." "Then the doom stands as spoken," said Ozer, and he did not look at her while he said it. "The keep of the fire of Vardhaug goes off the house of Amund Rafnsson to the house of Solvi at Kolnes. The fine of 12 marks is remitted against the value of the keep. The cairn on this ground is thrown down. Give me the iron." She got the strap over her head. It stuck on the braid at her neck, and she had to work it free, and 64 people watched her do it, and the only sound on that headland was a raven going over. She put her father's fire iron box into the lawman's hands. Bard's men picked up the bars. "Hold," said somebody, from the top of the steps. He came up onto the swept stone with sleet frost in his beard and the gray wolf beside him and a bundle of paper under his arm, having walked the 30 miles from Hafsburg side in a night and a morning, and Ingirid felt the bottom go out of her stomach. "Go back down," she said. He walked past her. "Go back down," she said again, and got hold of his sleeve, and he took her hand off it without any violence at all and set it aside, the way you move a branch, and went to the cairn. "You've no standing here, Warden," said Bard, pleasantly. "A survey is a survey. This is a doom of the district." "It is," said Steinar. He put the bundle of paper down on the snow, got up over the stone ring in one movement, and stood inside it on the flat of the heart with the fresh split spruce she had carried up 3 days before packed dry all round his boots. He knelt down. He pulled a double handful of dry heather out of the channel and made a nest of it against the windhole, the way she had shown him on the first morning. And then he took the horn off his belt and put his thumb under the hinge of the iron cap. Ingirid went over the ring after him. She got both hands on his forearm, all her weight, and she had carried 40 loads a year up a headland since she was 14, and she could not move him an inch. "Don't," she said. "Steinar, listen to me, listen." She had her mouth about 6 inches from his ear, and she was saying it fast and low so that the 64 people 10 feet away would not hear it, which was hopeless. And she knew it was hopeless, and she went on doing it. "That's the fire law. There's no fine for that one. They don't take silver for that one. You put an unlawful fire on a cairn in front of a district and a lawman, and they will take your hands off. They'll put you off the coast. You'll be nobody's man anywhere north of the mountains for the rest of your life. And for what? I'm losing a hill. I'll live. I've got 9 sheep and a byre and an old man, and I will live. And you are going to lose everything you have in front of me for nothing. And I will not have it. Put it out. Put it down, please. I'm not worth this. Put it down." Steinar Håkansson turned his head and looked at her from about 4 inches away, and there was something in his face she had never seen in it, and did not understand until much later, which was relief. "Ingirid," he said, "let go of my arm." "No, let go of my arm," he said, "and count." And he opened the cap and tipped the horn, and 3 embers off the hearth at Hafsburg went down into the heather. The heather took with a noise like a bird getting up. The spruce took after it. It went up the channel to the windhole and into the heart of the stack, and 64 people came 2 steps back all at once from the heat of it. And the fire on Vardhaug stood up 20 feet in the air on a windless blue afternoon in front of the whole district. Ozur Thorbergsson had not moved. He was standing where he had been standing, with her father's fire-iron box in his hands, and he was not looking at the fire. He was looking at the horn, at the iron cap of it hanging open on its hinge, and at the mark stamped into the iron, which he had seen once before in his life, in the ice year, when a man came up the shore road at Hjaltvik carrying it. The lawman of the Ravnsund said, in a voice that did not work properly, "That is the seat's fire." Nobody said anything. There was no shout. 64 people stood on a headland in the cold and did not make a sound, and afterwards, when they talked about it, which they did for the rest of their lives, that was the part they could not get across to anybody who had not been there, how quiet it was. "That is the seat's fire," said Ozur again, louder, to the district, because that was his office, and he did it. Carried from the hearth at Hafsburg and laid by the hand it was sent from. There is no man on this coast may carry it but one. And Ingirid, who still had both hands on a plain wool sleeve, said, "Count what?" "Look north," said Steinar. She let go of him and turned round. The doorway was the notch between 2 hills 4 miles up the water where the Selhog fire would show, and she had watched that notch all night in a northeaster, and seen nothing in it, and she had not looked at it since without her chest hurting. There was a fire in it. She made a sound. She did not know she had made it. It was small with the distance and very clear in the blue afternoon, and while she was looking at it a second one came up 7 miles beyond it on Kolnes Head, on Bard Solvason's own headland, on the good cairn, with the woodcut 2 years ahead that had never been lit in its life. Then Brudhog, where there was no cairn at all, where the stones were in a sheepfold. Then Orns. Then a long gap while she stopped breathing, and then Crossvik, and Eternus, and one she could not name a way up where the land went blue, and turning the other way, south, one after another, on every headland from Vardhaug to where the mountains shut the view. She counted them out loud. She got to 19 that she could see with her own eyes, and she was crying so hard by 12 that Anand, who had been carried up those 401 steps that morning on a hurdle by 2 men from the shore road, had to finish the count for her. 42, said Steinar. There'll be 42. The last 6 will be a light before dark. There's nobody on those hills. There is now. He was looking at the water, and not at her. I've had 90 men out of the Hafsburg Guard on this coast for 5 weeks putting them back. 2 to a headland, a cord of dry wood, a hide and an iron, and orders to watch the Vardhaug point and light if it lit or if the seat's fire went up anywhere on this water. I had them go up the back roads at night. You saw them twice and asked me who they were, and I told you they were nothing to do with us, and that was the worst lie I have ever told anybody. Bard Solvason said, from somewhere behind them, in a voice like a man in a well, Lawman. The doom. Ozer did not turn round. There is no doom, he said. A cairn burning under the seat's fire may not be thrown down, moved, judged, or taken off the house that holds it. It is crowned. It is fed until the seat's fire goes out, by every man standing on the ground where it burns. He looked at the 4 iron bars lying in the snow. Get wood. They crowned the Vardhaug cairn all that afternoon and all that night. 64 people went up and down 411 steps in the dark with what they could carry. And when the stack under the tarred hide was gone, they went at the Selhog spruce with bars and axes. And Bard Solvason of Kolness carried 9 loads up those steps with his own hands and did not once open his mouth. And Halla stood at the bottom in the snow, feeding the carriers out of a pot until the sun came up. Somewhere in the middle of the night, Ingirid found herself standing beside the lawman with her hands round a hot cup. What do I call him? She said. Ozer Thorbergsson, who was past 70 and had been carrying wood for 6 hours and was, she realized, extremely happy, made a small noise that in a younger man would have been a laugh. Girl, he said, you've been calling him it for 5 weeks. On this water, we don't say the name. Not out loud, not since the ice year, and not for 300 years before that. We say the seat. We say the king. We say the fire at Hafsburg. There's not a man in this district under 50 who has ever heard it said in the open, which is why not one of us knew it when it walked up your steps and handed it to you. He drank. Steinar Håkansson, you've been shouting it at him across a wood stack since the storm month. I heard you tell him to get off the hide. She sat down on a stone. He found her there an hour before dawn, when the carrying had thinned and the fire had settled into the deep red a crowned cairn goes to, and he sat down on the snow with his back against the ring and waited. Say it, said Ingirid. There was a ship, said the Alpha King of Hafsburg. She put her hands over her face. 30 men and a 30-oar ship, running up the Ravnsund at night in a northeaster because I had word out of the south I could not sit on until the weather mended. We came inside the horses at about 2 in the morning on the flood, on marks that were 60 years old, and I can tell you exactly how much of it I could see. None. There was white on the starboard bow where the horses ought to be, and white under the lee where nothing has ever broken in the history of this water, and 70 yards of black between the two of them, and no way under heaven to know which black was the road. He stopped for a moment. And a fire came up on the point, he said. And I knew where I was. We put the helm over on it and went through with the bank breaking on one hand and your headland going past close enough to throw a rope at, and by first light we were 40 miles north. And nothing of that ship came ashore anywhere on this coast, because nothing of it was lost. That is what you saw. That is why 6 boats out of Hjaltvik found kelp and a dogfish, and why every honest man in this district was certain you were a liar, because they went and looked for wreckage, and the proof of a fire is that there isn't any. Ingirid took her hands down. You knew, she said. You came up my steps on the 12th day, and you knew. I came up your steps to find out which headland it was, I had 43 of them and one night and a bearing. And I had a district that had been let off its watch, and I could not work out how there had been any fire at all. And then I got to Hjaltvik and heard 4 versions of a woman who lit a false one. And I knew before I was off the shore road. He looked at his hands. Yes, I knew. 5 weeks. 5 weeks. They said I lit it to bring men up my hill, said Ingirid. Halla said it at the well while you were 4 miles off sounding the gate. Ozer asked me in front of 60 people whether anything of her had been found on the shore, and I had to stand there and say no, and you knew. And you sat in my house and ate my food and mended my father's strap and said nothing. Yes, say why, and don't make it a good reason. Say the true one. Steinar Håkansson said, because if I had stood up in that long house and said I was the king and I saw your fire, you would have been clear inside a minute. And this coast would have gone home. And next winter there would have been 42 heaps of cold stone on this water, and one woman going up 411 steps in the dark, and the next ship in the gate would have gone onto that bank with everybody aboard her, and nobody would ever have connected the 2 things. A king's word clears one woman. It cannot buy a coast. I needed them to see the chain answer. He turned his head. It was the correct decision, and I would make it again. And it cost you 5 weeks of your life that I cannot give back. You could have told me. Not them. Me. You'd have carried it in front of Ozer, and you cannot lie. You are the worst liar I have ever met. And Bard would have had it out of you in 3 questions. He was quiet. And I could not do the other half either. And stand up before your doom and put my name on you, because then you are the woman the king took a fancy to. And every good thing that happens on this coast for 20 years is a favor. I'd have hated it, she agreed. I know. They sat there. The cairn ticked and shifted. You let me hold your arm and beg you not to ruin yourself, she said. In front of everybody. You were begging me not to lose my hands, for a hill you were losing anyway. That is the only thing anyone has ever offered me in my life with nothing in it for them at all. And I will be honest with you, I let it go on 2 breaths longer than I needed to. Ingirid Amundsdottir began to laugh, and then found she could not stop, and then put her head against his shoulder. And he put his arm round her very carefully, like a man handling something he has been told is fragile and knows perfectly well is not. At the thing after the Frostmoon the seat gave the keep of the fires of the Ravnsund, all 43 of them from Hofsberg to the fresh water at the head, into the hand of Ingirid Amundsdottir of Vardhaug, wood out of the king's forest, an iron for every ring. 2 men to a headland from the Frostmoon to the thaw, and the sounding of the gate remarked and written into the book in her name. She was 24 winters old and could not read a word of it. Ozer read it to her twice, and she made him do it a 3rd time in front of Bard. She took that first. She made him wait 9 days for the other, and she did it in the open, on the point, with the district on the swept stone, because she was not going to have it whispered. Say it properly, she said. Not that you'll have me. Everybody has watched you shovel my snow for 6 weeks. They've all had their fun. Say the thing you tried to say on the floor of the longhouse and turned into a remark about my gown. And the Alpha King of Hafsburg said, in front of 70 people who had watched her buy meal with her head down all winter, you are mine, and I am yours. And I have been since a night in the storm month when I did not know your name or your face and could not have found this headland again in daylight. Every soul on this coast owes you a ship. I owe you the rest of my life, and I would like to spend it on this water. The Frostmoon came up out of the mountains behind her while she was working out what to do with her face, and the thing under her ribs that had been shut like a hand since a flat calm in the 5th month turned all the way over and stood up. And Ingirid Amundsdottir put her head back and let out a sound that had been 2 years coming, and 4 miles up the water at Sailhaug, a grey wolf answered her. And then Kolnens. And then Bruthog. and away up the Sund from headland to headland, which is not a thing anybody who was standing there ever forgot. She kept the chain for 41 years. On the first watch night of the next winter, she went up the 411 steps at dusk with her husband carrying the wood and struck her father's iron on her own cairn, for practice. Because a keeper who has never seen the chain answer does not truly believe in it. The fire went up. In the notch between the two hills, Selhaug came up 6 minutes later, and Kolnes at 20, and then Orns and Krosvik and Eternus, away north into the dark and away south toward the seat, 42 fires on 90 miles of water inside the hour, and 43 keepers standing next to them in the cold for no reason whatsoever. Nothing happened that night. Nothing happened for 11 winters after it, on the Ravnsund, in the storm month, in the dark, which is the finest thing that can be said about any coast in the world, and the only proof a fire will ever give you.